So the next absolute edition that I have that's on its way is Multiversity by Grant Morrison. So I thought I would just talk about Grant Morrison for a bit and uh, try and keep this video around 10 minutes and then just cut it off at that point. So Grant Morrison is another very polarizing writer. Some people absolutely love his writing and some people hate it. And I'm in both camps. What I'm going to show here, this is kind of an example of something I hate, which is maybe I need to reread it sometime because my understanding is that his run on Justice League was highly regarded. I hated it. Then we have over here Superman, All-Star Superman, which is very well regarded and almost universally loved. Very few people don't like Superman, All-Star Superman. And I think part of it is the gorgeous artwork by Frank Quitely, which I believe is a pen name. I don't think his actual name is Frank Quitely. This one is absolutely spectacular. And I have the deluxe edition here. I can't remember if there's probably an absolute, and maybe I have it, but it would be stored away. Besides the artwork, the writing is amazing, fantastic. So I'll start with the stuff that I don't like about Grant Morrison, and then move into what I really do like. So the problem with Grant Morrison, I think, and the quality of his writing can vary quite quite a lot. Let me also start by saying that he's a Scottish writer. As I do this, he's in his early 60s. I think he's 62 right now. And I'm not sure if he's even writing comics anymore. I think he wrote for Marvel years ago, then really focused on DC. He also does his own thing. So I think maybe he's done with DC, although sometimes he might come back. I think he's done some other stuff. The most recent stuff I've read from him was the Green Lantern. The problem that comes up many times with Grant Morrison in his writing is issues of storytelling. He is one of the most creative writers ever in comics, but sometimes he has difficulty taking those ideas in his head and putting them into a story. And in one review I wrote on Amazon, I said that sometimes his storytelling is like a breathless 6-year-old trying to tell you something amazing that happened on their walk back home from school. And a lot of times it seems like he just kind of skips over, like he doesn't get into the details of the story, but it's like the ideas in his head aren't translating because he's not giving you enough. He's not taking the time to really explain what's going on. Things just happen. And I've kind of, at other times, I've described it as kind of the plotless storytelling. And that doesn't mean he does it all the time. There's definitely a plot in here. And he's done some fantastic stuff. The other problem is a lot of times the characters that he writes don't talk like human beings. They talk like either exposition dumps or it seems like it's just Grant Morrison talking through a character. And then in other times, he's really good at doing characterizations. So it's hard to tell what you're going to get with Grant Morrison. And I don't know why the quality varies so much. Another thing he does, this was something that Alan Moore would do, which is he would kind of integrate in a lot of theoretical physics, and it just could get tiresome, and it's like your mind glazes over. At least mine would. I'd just be like, okay, there he goes again. If you can do it and integrate it in well, as Alan Moore does, whenever I'm doing these videos, I always spot like imperfections on here, and then I focus on the little dent right there. It's almost impossible to have a flawless book. But anyway, Alan Moore could do it, and not always. I remember in the closing couple of comics of Miracle Man, I mean, he got very poetic. Alan Moore got very poetic, and I just like, okay, this is not for me. Um, Again, my mind was just shutting off. I wasn't really paying even attention to what he was writing. So Grant Morrison, I would say Grant Morrison is one of my all time favorite writers when he's on, and I would say he more often than not his stuff is fantastic, and I prefer writers that will swing for the fences and sometimes have a big old whiff uh, over a writer who's always trying to hit singles. If a writer never moves you, it's just like, oh yeah, that was fine. Okay, yeah, that was fine. Uh, it's kind of boring. So I would much rather have a writer like Grant Morrison, where you might get something spectacular or you might get something spectacularly bad, over someone that's always like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Because the stories that he writes that are memorable are extremely memorable. And I would say that Superman, All Star Superman, is one of the best, maybe the best he's done, but he's done other great stuff too. And I did really enjoy Multiversity, and that's why I'm getting the Absolute Edition, because I thought that Multiversity had so many great ideas. And I'm going to point out when I get it, the flaws of Multiversity, and some of the flaws are not Grant Morrison's fault. I can't blame Grant Morrison for some of this. You know, sometimes, I mean, they're at the whim of the publisher and what the publisher chooses to do. Um, but I'm going to eventually start going through various series that he's done, and he's done a ton, and I've collected a ton. And I really, Grant Morrison is one of the few writers in comics where if he writes something, I'm almost assuredly going to pick it up. So he did this may be the last thing he did for DC. The last series was Green Lantern, and Green Lantern was another polarizing series because it was a hard series. Uh, it was not an easy read, and so I think a lot of people, um, and I'm not going to blame the readers. I know that I would sometimes criticize in my reviews Grant Morrison, and I never had times where the fans would attack me so much. And it usually is I'm just not smart enough to figure out um, his writing. Um, and sometimes it's difficult to say whether it's a matter of I'm not smart enough or whether the emperor has no clothes and there's really nothing there. Um, and it's just gibberish. And sometimes when he gets into those theoretical physics, I don't think that there's anything. He's just throwing out terms, and it's kind of uh, tiresome. And I could probably give some examples when I go through individual series. I liked the Green Lantern series. I didn't think it was one of his best. Like a lot of writers, even Alan Moore went through this, which is that he would get started on a series like Gangbusters, and I've always had the impression that some of these really good writers, Marv Wolfman and with the Teen Titans, it's like they start off with an idea or a set of ideas, and then at some point those ideas are spent, and now they're looking for something new, and sometimes what they come up with just isn't that good. And I think with Alan Moore, I thought that his run on Swamp Thing and his run on Miracle Man started off amazing and then kind of tailed off near the end. And Alan Moore, in my opinion, is the greatest writer ever. So if it can happen to Alan Moore, it can happen to anyone. And with Grant Morrison, I thought his run on Batman was spectacular, but it just kept losing momentum. And by the end, I just think it was time to move on. And so I don't think that it was a bad thing that he quit. He maybe should have quit or passed it on another year earlier, possibly. Unfortunately, I think a lot of lesser writers took over and tried to emulate what Grant Morrison did and made it even worse. And I hate to say it, but because I really am a huge fan of Tom King. Tom King, I think, tried to, in many ways, emulate Grant Morrison, and it didn't go well, in my opinion. Scott Snyder, he always writes like he's leaning over the shoulders of Alan Moore and Grant Morrison and just taking notes. And I hated his run on Batman. His run wasn't awful. He had some good parts, but I think he just was trying to crib off of other better writers like Grant Morrison. Anyway, I'm well over 10 minutes, so I'm going to let this go. But that's my introduction to Grant Morrison.